All right, making a reappearance on Pittsburgh Sports Now. His first appearance was so popular, the fans wanted more Zeise, so you got him. And what a better week to have him here than Pitt-Penn State. First thing I want to ask you, since you're a talk show host on 93.7 The Fan, and been around this rivalry forever, being a Western Pennsylvania guy, are you somewhat surprised at? I am a little bit of the, hatred of the fans toward Penn State, considering the fact that they don't play anymore like they used to. Or is that the reason why, is because they don't play anymore? I'm just a little shocked at how much the hatred still is there.
Well, I think most of the hatred you find is among older fans. The older fans, the older alumni, those people that were around this rivalry when it was really actually a rivalry. They remember sort of the Joe Paterno and sort of how he had a hand in killing this thing, and the resentment of over the years when Penn State started getting really good, sort of the arrogance of them up there looking down their noses at Pitt. But that's sort of the older group. I don't know if the younger fans, some of them are trying to manufacture hatred, but the younger fans have grown up really without this rivalry in a lot of ways. So anytime, like on my talk show, anytime people call in and they're, they want to yell about Pitt or yell even about Penn State from the other way, it's always an older person. It's never, the younger people. I think actually there's a group of younger people that probably think it's cooler to play teams like Miami and some of these teams that they've played all the time or for a number of years and all that other stuff. So there's always going to be, because it's an in-state thing, there's always going to be that hatred or anger, but it's a lot more prevalent the older you get into the fan base. The younger groups, even on Pitt side and Penn State side, the younger groups, they just really don't have that much of that same sort of vantage point of this. And, a lot of this has changed, in terms of the way that things have gone in this rivalry. It used to be Western PA was, kicking out, 35, 40, 45 Division I players every single year. So both teams were recruiting this area a lot. And so you had players that were teammates and players that played against each other. Pitt doesn't really, Pitt tries to get the best players from the Whippeal, and Penn State doesn't seem to come here at all, really. They recruit in Virginia and New Jersey and places like that a lot more than they recruit here. So a lot of that is just generational, The older group, the older you get, there is still that hatred. There is still that, let's get up for this. The younger groups, it's more of a novelty, I think, than anything else.
When you were growing up, was there, how much did you look forward to the rivalry? Did you have a memory or a game or two that really stand out to you?
Yeah, well, the thing is, I grew up, my dad went to Pitt, okay? And I grew up in a family where, my mom was from Crescent, which is, up, you go past Evansburg. And she had a really big family. And I always joke, but it's almost true. You go from like Evansburg to like Bellefonte, and like every third family I'm related to somehow, So my whole family was all Penn State people, and of course my dad was the one that went to Pitt, so we were kind of the black sheep. And that always made it great because, back then we used to get together for Thanksgiving all the time, every single year. And back then that's when the games were. So there was a lot of games growing up, and I used to really look forward to. I can remember, one of my, and probably a lot of Pitt fans or people that grew up rooting for Pitt or whatever. The 48-14 game sticks out. Dan Marino's going down the field. He throws the second touchdown pass. He's got the fingers in the air. We're number one, and then it just went downhill from there. And I never heard the end of that for the whole next year. Couple of games that probably most people forget about that really stick out from that era too. The 10-0 game. I think it would have been about 88, 87, where it was a 3-0 game, and They threw an interception. Penn State threw an interception late. I forget who it was. Down the sideline, and Mike Gottfried is running down the sideline. Actually, jumps into the pile. I don't know. That's for some reason that seemed like a big game at the time. So there was that game, and then the one game. I think it was 84-85. Pitt was atrocious. I mean, bad, like 3-7-1, and they went up and they pounded Penn State. I think it was like 31-10 or something. Those games stand out from from that era when I was growing up. For Pitt's standpoint, one of the biggest games I think over the last 15 to 18 years for Pitt as a program probably was the 12-0 game at Three Rivers Stadium with Rod Rutherford. Walt Harris inherited a program that was coming off Johnny Majors too, and at that point they were actually recruiting off of like blueprints for Heinz Field and blueprints for the Southside facility. They were trying to be taken seriously. There were still a lot of good players in the area, and they were just trying to sort of be validated as a program, and they just needed one win like that to get them in the minds of a lot of people over the top. And so they played, and obviously Rod Rutherford was a big recruiting win for Pitt over Penn State, if you remember. Tom Bradley and Joe Paterno were like in a restaurant or something across the street from Perry High School waiting for him to make his announcement, and everybody thought it was going to be kind of Penn State, Michigan State, I think, were the two teams. Everyone kind of thought he was going to, it was going to be one of those two, no doubt. And he ended up picking Pitt, and then it turns out, he had the big play. So really, those are the games that stand out in my mind the most. Penn State's 48-14 for, because it ruined Pitt's season, really. I mean, if they win that game, they probably win the national title, and a couple of those other games. But again, 12-0 was a big, big game for the Walt Harris, trying to get the program off the mat.
Having the talk show this week, the talk this week coming out of both camps. Narduzzi's press conference, he closed it out by saying, people could say what they want if they don't want to think it's a rivalry or it's a big game. They're wrong all week. It seems as though James Franklin must have coached his kids up onto exactly what to say because they're all saying the exact same quote. Does Penn State really believe that it's not a big game, or is it I don't know if they're trying to play a mental game with Pitt to say, hey, you're down there, we're up here. Where do you fall on that side of the fence?
I remember last year when this first thing came back. So for the 4-year deal, when it came back, talking to some of the people over at Pitt, one of the biggest things that Penn State insisted on for press releases, for any kind of publicity for this thing, is that the word rivalry was not allowed to be used. That was a condition of Penn State because they wanted to make it very clear that this was going to be, just a game for them, and that they didn't, because we're unrivaled and all that nonsense. I mean, here's the thing. I get a kick out of Penn State fan. They claim they don't care about Pitt. They claim it's not a big game. They claim all these other games are big, right? But anytime I write or say anything about Pitt, it could have nothing to do with Penn State. The first 10 people to jump down my throat are Penn State fans. And I always say, wait, I thought you didn't care about Pitt. The thing is, there's a lot of fans that this is a big game for. And, James Franklin has tried so hard to go about saying, oh, well, it's the same as, every other game. But he knows, and they know. This is a much bigger game than who do they play next, or Appalachian State or whoever they play next. I mean, the bottom line is, this is a game that's really much bigger probably for the fans than the players and the people that are outside, but it's a big game. And so Penn State, they've got this thing where they're trying to be, unrivaled, and that's their, little shtick or whatever. The funny thing is they view, they try and view like Ohio State or Michigan State or those schools as like their rivals, and those schools view the same way they view Pitt, where it's kind of like, no, you're really not. You're just some school that's way out there in the middle of nowhere that every so often gets lucky and wins the Big Ten, basically. So, I don't know. I look at it and I say, it's James Franklin. It's his shtick. It's his thing. Every week is a big game, right? But again, that whole every week is our Super Bowl, right? That whole nonsense. Okay, so you're telling me that Akron is as important as Ohio State? Is that what you're telling me, that that you do the same things to get ready for Akron that you do for Ohio State? It's just silly. And here's the thing, Pat Narduzzi and James Franklin. The funny thing about those two guys and why there's always like this passive aggressive stuff between them, they're exactly the same. They're exactly the same in their approach. They're exactly the same in sort of their, I don't want to use the word arrogance, but they both believe that, you know what I mean, that there's nothing they can't accomplish, They're both the same. So to me, Pat Narduzzi says some things that are passive aggressive and takes little shots here and there. So does Franklin. But that whole shtick, again, that starts from the athletic department. Because again, you're not allowed to use the word rival in press releases. You're not allowed to use in any of the publicity, in any of the posters, any of the things that go about this game. You're not allowed to use the word rival. Which, by the way, if I was Pitt, I'd say, well, then we're not going to play the game. You're not going to tell me what we're going to do. But anyway, go ahead.
Obviously, James Franklin is villain number one in this rivalry. Jopa is no longer here. James Franklin is at the top of the list. If you had to pick one thing, is there a moment or something he does or said or whatever, what annoys him, in your opinion, so much about for Pitt fans?
What annoys Pitt fans about him?
Yeah.
I would say the whole thing. Well, obviously the Akron comment, which
They seem to dislike him from day one.
Right.
Is it just because he's the Penn State coach, or is there something
He's the Penn State coach. Okay, he's brash. He comes off as very arrogant. And the whole we're going to dominate the state and all that other stuff. But the biggest part of it is he wins. He's good. I mean, here's the thing. I think Pitt's got a really good coach in Pat Narduzzi, but take Pat Narduzzi out of the equation. If you told me tomorrow that James Franklin was the Pitt coach, Pitt fans should rejoice because he's really good. And so when you're good, you can be a little bit arrogant, but that's a part of it. It's when you're not good, you're not really. I mean, or you're just kind of innocuous. Like I'll give you an example. Bill O'Brien. Most people forget he was a Penn State coach, but when he was around, you didn't hear Pitt fans talking about it. No, they weren't playing at the time, but you didn't hear Pitt fans talking about Bill O'Brien. He was just a sort of an innocuous kind of guy who went about this business, and did it in a quiet way. What's that Frank Sinatra song? I did it my way and not in a shy way. That's James Franklin. That's the way he does it, man. He's good. He's really good. I mean, I think he's a great coach. I see why he rubs people the wrong way, though. But you know what? There are things that Pat Narduzzi does and says that rubs Penn State fans the wrong way, and they don't like and they object to, because like I said, they're both very similar.
This week, another big, actually last week, close to you because it's the Temple Owls. A lot of it was made. I think it was a little bit too much, but I don't think it was a surprise. But they want to talk about it. Penn State chose to do a home and home with Temple as opposed to possibly doing with Pitt. Is that Penn State just sticking it up Pitt's rear, or is it? Hey, we got to look for ourselves. The BCS playoffs, the playoff system. We can't take a chance here. Or is it a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I'm happy they're going to play Temple. That means Temple we're going to get 2 wins, 2 big wins for us. No, I think there's a little bit of both, but I think there's another element that's involved, and that is the recruiting base in Philadelphia and New Jersey, the alumni base in Philadelphia and New Jersey. I mean, I don't have a problem at all with how Penn State is scheduling. You've got 9 conference games. That's the Big Ten. That's what they're doing. And, you look at it, if you've got 9 conference games, it means you really only have room for 1 home and home. And people say, well, you could play 2. Who's playing 2? Go throughout the country and see how many teams are playing 11 Power 5 teams. And you'd be hard-pressed to find most. Most are playing 10. They're playing their 8 conference games and then 2 Power 5s like Pitt is doing, right? And a lot of teams do that. But my point is, Penn State, they've got alumni everywhere, okay? Now, the Penn State fan who says, oh, well, we're playing tougher games against Virginia Tech and all this stuff, that's nonsense. They've got alumni everywhere. They've got the largest alumni base in the country of any school. So they want to play games in regions so their fans can see them. So I don't have a problem with them not playing Pitt at home and home. I would hope that every 10 years they would play at least one home and home against Pitt, because it's something they should do, and it's still Western PA. It's still, at least on some level, part of their base, and they've got a lot of alums in Allegheny County. But this thing where they got to play Pitt every single year, I wouldn't either if I was Penn State. I wouldn't. I would try, and what they're doing, and they're going to Temple, which is in Philadelphia. It's there. They're going to Virginia Tech, which is that Southern Virginia region, and Upper North Carolina and all that area. They're going to Auburn, which is in the South. If I was Penn State, I would try and figure out a way to play against USC or UCLA or one of those schools and go out there and play in California, So to me, I think all of this stuff about, we're trying to make it so we can get to the playoff and all that stuff, I think it's all nonsense. I think what they're trying to do is basically showcase their team for their fans and their alums in different regions and play different teams. I mean, someone pointed out, Iowa plays Iowa State every week. Okay, good. How many alums of Iowa are outside of the state of Iowa? I mean, really. I mean, if you think about it, there can't be that many. I'm sure they want to see that game because most of them probably still live there.
Let's get to the game here. I think a little bit, I've been saying this for the whole offseason, and one of the reasons I picked Pitt to win the game, and not because I run a Pitt site. I'm not a homer. I think a lot is being downplayed a little bit with and you might have saw it in the first game against Appalachian State, the amount of talent that Penn State graduated. You just don't lose an entire defense, a running back, tight end, all that stuff they lost, and not miss a beat from the first game of the year. Do you think it's going to be a lot closer than people are anticipating?
I think that if you look at this game, it's going to be a really, really, really close, hotly contested game. I think both teams, if you really take a look at it, they've got some areas they've got to prove that they're better at. I'm not sure that we've learned much about either of these two teams in week one. Penn State, they lost a lot, and they lost a lot on defense. Of course, they've got some guys coming back from injury and whatnot, so I think their defense will be a little better this weekend. But it's week one. All you're trying to do is survive sometimes, and that's what they did. They found a way to win. In Pitt's case, they looked really good in the first half against they play Albany, but the reality is, they run the first kickoff back. They get a interception, it was run back to like the 10 or something, right, or 15 or something. So really they had 14 of those 33 points were kind of just return plays. It's not like their offense grinded out a bunch of yards. It's not like they, ran up and down the field on Albany. So, and in the second half, they did, it was a 0-0, I think, or whatever. So my point is, I don't know that we know enough about either team to really know what it's going to look like. But what we can say is that the game, probably is going to be close. It's probably going to be, contested and competitive and get into the fourth quarter. And at that point, it's just a matter of who executes and who makes some plays. I think Penn State lost some players, but you know what? Going back to what I said about James Franklin, he's recruited a lot of good players. So, maybe they're young, but he's got talent on that team. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it matches up. If you look at it, to me, there's two keys. Penn State has to stop Pitt's running game. And I think if they do, it's going to be a long day for Pitt's offense. I think they're going to have to run the ball and run it with power and run it with, kind of authority. And when they want to run it, they've got to be able to do that to open some things up for Kenny Pickett in the passing game. And I think if they can run the ball with authority, they're going to have a chance to have a pretty good day offensively. In Pitt's case, they've got to find a way to stop Trace McSorley, who I think is fantastic. And so he's the kind of guy, too, can look terrible for 3 quarters, and in the 4th quarter he's going to rip your heart out because he's going to make every play he needs to make to get there, to take them down the field to score to win the game. So those are the keys to me is, how does Pitt deal with McSorley? How does Penn State deal with Pitt's running game?
All right, Paul, appreciate the time. We'll get you back here in the down memory lane here on Pittsburgh Sports Now.
All right, thanks, Mike. Anytime.